Hello there, everybody. Several years ago, there was a new organization that was brought about in the Star Wars universe. An organization that was powerful, mighty, strong, and that had the power to destroy the entirety of the New Republic in a single swoop. And I am talking about the First Order. So today I want to talk about the First Order itself, how powerful it is, and actually how weak it is compared to the Empire of old. So without further ado, here we go. But first, we start at the beginning. The power structure of the First Order is very simple and it's not that hard to understand. At the top, we have Supreme Leader Snoke, the Dark Jedi, Dark Force user, who is the most powerful individual in the entire galaxy at this time, right next to Luke Skywalker. Under him, we immediately have Kylo Ren, the apprentice of Luke Skywalker and the son of Han Solo and General Leia Organa. And below him, or kind of side by side with him, we have General Hux. These three individuals altogether make up basically the power dynamic of the entirety of the First Order, with Supreme Leader Snoke leading the entire way through, Kylo Ren and General Hux basically playing at tug of war, trying to figure out who's actually the leader and for what reason. Kylo Ren thinks that he has more authority than General Hux, considering the fact that he is literally the actual apprentice of Supreme Leader Snoke, who's been teaching him the ways of the dark side of the Force for many, many years. Meanwhile, we have General Hux, who was literally born into the First Order and whose parents were literally officers and generals of the First Order and, of course, the Galactic Empire. And lastly, to make up this entire power dynamic is the one, the only Captain Phasma. Effectively, Captain Phasma is the commander of all of the First Order Stormtrooper forces, essentially acting as the leader of the ground troops in battles against the Resistance, and is officially a high-ranking officer overseeing the training and deployment of all stormtroopers throughout the entirety of the First Order. So it is quite literally no question that Captain Phasma, Hux, Kylo Ren, and Supreme Leader Snoke are all the most powerful individuals throughout the entirety of the First Order. But first, I think the most important question that we have to ask ourselves when it comes to this entire shindig is effectively, who allowed this to happen? Who was the one who basically not only gave the Empire enough resources and allowed them to gain enough influence to where they could turn the entire planet of Ilum into a giant space station with a Death Star laser cannon attached to it, but who is the one that basically allowed the entirety of the First Order to exist anyway, despite the fact that they were literally constructed from remnants of the former Empire? Well, that goes into a very, 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 very long story, and it has to do with the people inside of the actual Senate who were actually sympathizers of the old empire. Now, the first thing that we need to talk about is the hidden unknown regions. The unknown regions were basically uncharted areas in space that nobody really knew about. They were uncharted and unknown regions in the first place. Nobody knew what was out there, nobody knew what existed out there. For God's sake, the Yuzan Vong could have been out there and nobody would have known about it. But the main capture point of this entire idea is that the unknown regions were uncharted. Nobody knew what was out there. But the main point of this entire idea is that the unknown regions were completely unassociated with the New Republic. They had very little to no presence out there. And the First Order was basically allowed to build themselves from the ground up without any detection from the New Republic or without really any interference. The second reason is the former Imperial remnant. Back in the day after the destruction of the Empire, many of the actual war criminals who were responsible for the creation of and responsible for the effectiveness of the Empire were basically told to work for the Republic, and that was an extremely bad idea. Because if history has taught us anything, you don't allow people who formerly worked for sociopathic weirdos to work for you, or else you get Hydra. But because of that, many high-ranking Imperial officers, technologists, and nobles who were dissatisfied with the New Republic's rule formed the foundation of the First Order. They were funneling them funds, they were giving them new information, they were giving them new technology, they were providing them with literally everything and anything that they required to build up the First Order to a new degree so they could effectively do whatever they wanted whenever they wanted. Even in Mando Season 3, we see that even by the time of 9 ABY, Imperial remnants are all over the place. They're building up their forces, they're building up their ideas, and they're basically stealing ideas and stealing information from the New Republic so they can provide it to the Imperial remnant. And the last reason as to why the First Order was allowed to build themselves up so openly is mainly the fact that the Republic really didn't care. I'm not gonna lie. Throughout the entirety of the New Republic, we constantly hear word about how we don't have enough resources to send X to Y, we don't have enough to do A and B, we don't have enough to do this or that or these things. Basically, the entirety of the Republic at this time was stretched so thinly that they couldn't do anything about literally anything, which caused the Republic to become stale and stagnant, not allowing them to enforce their military or to build up their military ranks to the point where they could actually fight off a bigger threat. Like, here's a main example. The entirety of the Republic was so stretched thin by the end of Mando Season 3 that they got to a point where they couldn't even fight off the Imperial remnant that was being led by Moff Gideon, and he was literally on Mandalore collecting Mandalorian iron, making his own stormtrooper armor, and making his own clones so he would have Force-sensitive Moff Gideon clones fighting against the New Republic. Now here's the real question. Moff Gideon making clones of himself that have Force-sensitive abilities while also making an entire army of stormtroopers armed to the brim with Mandalorian iron stormtrooper armor and high-tech military-grade blasters. Is that not a big enough threat for you to justify using the entirety of the Republic military to fight against this threat? If that's not, then I don't know what is. Because I'm not gonna lie, it was that incompetence that ultimately led to the Republic's downfall. Because if you couldn't find a justifiable enough reason to use the Republic military to fight against a former Imperial warlord who was actively making clones of himself and arming his troops with Mandalorian iron, then what makes you think that they're actually gonna do anything against the First Order who are secretly building up their forces in the hidden, unknown regions of the entirety of the galaxy? Like, whenever you watch The Force Awakens for the first time, and you see the new stormtroopers, you see the new Imperial Star Destroyers, and you see all of this, and you're like, okay, why did the Republic basically allow this to exist, and why did they allow them to rise at this caliber and rate? And then you look at all of the stuff that happened, like in Mando, in Boba Fett, and all of these other shows, and you're like, oh wow, so the Republic literally just allowed the Empire to rise, and they didn't do anything to stop the Empire from doing anything. Okay, that's great. So not only was the New Republic military so incompetent that they didn't even know that Moff Gideon was going around making clones of himself, arming his own Imperial forces with Mandalorian iron, and planning to fight against the Republic with his new forces, but they didn't even know that the First Order was literally out here making their own equipment, doing their own thing, until 20 years after the fact. Okay, alright, that's all I need to hear. So yeah, the rise of the First Order didn't really take that long, and the rise of the Imperial Remnant and them being allowed to do whatever they wanted could only be halted by outside groups that were not actually the Republic. Awesome.